Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. For listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist, architect, or in this case, entrepreneur, about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today, it gives me huge pleasure to talk to Tom Szaky. Tom is the founder and CEO of TerraCycle, a platform working in over 20 countries recycling a vast array of materials that other people simply don't want. Think cigarette butts, dirty nappies, biscuit wrappers, coffee pods, and pet food bags, to name just a few. Meanwhile, Loop, which he launched in 2019, is a system for reuse where manufacturers can develop reusable versions of their products that are then sold through major retailers with the same convenience as current disposable items. Over the years, Tom has written 4 books, as well as producing and starring in TerraCycle's reality TV show Human Resources, and won a slew of awards. Tom, thank you very much for doing this. How the devil are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. We are talking over the internet because you are in America. Can I ask where you are today?
I'm in our global headquarters, which is in Trenton, New Jersey. That's the capital of the state of New Jersey.
Okay. Why New Jersey? Is this a hangover from Princeton?
It is. Princeton was 10 minutes from here. And when I left school in the middle of my second year, this was the closest place I could find a suitable facility. So totally no planning whatsoever to where I've now spent, 20 plus years.
Yeah. We have a tradition on this podcast of asking people to kind of describe their workplaces, the idea being that listeners might learn something about the guests from how they work. So could you describe your office for us? I think there's quite a lot of art and also quite a lot of rubbish. I was about to say trash and be American then, but quite a lot of rubbish going on.
Yes. Yeah. So we are in TerraCycle's headquarters, which, to give you a sense of scale, is about 25,000 square feet in meters. I'd be like 2,500 square meters. It's all office type based staff and laboratories and design studios. So one of the design aesthetics we have here is everything must be made from waste. My desk is an old table. My conference room is set up on old wine barrels. Every chair we have is waste from some office renovation. The walls around me are all soda bottles and so on and so forth. And because we are in the third most dangerous city in America, we also have a lot of urban art all over our walls. So now the indoor art, stays, but the outdoor art is repainted almost every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how nice the weather is.
Well, who does that?
We just open it up. Honestly, anyone can come in. So we open up our building to any urban artist. And we've had actually people fly in from Brazil or the UK. People can paint anything they want. There's just rules that has to be family friendly. That's the only rule we have, just because there's so many kids, tours of schools that come through our buildings. And then here, in addition to sort of doing office type work, we have our upcycling design studio where we think about how do we upcycle materials. And then we have our laboratories where we think about how do we take materials apart, either through mechanical or chemical processes. And then we're in 20 countries. So there's other offices like this, elsewhere. But then there's a whole manufacturing kit that takes whatever we develop here and then implements it, and does it at large scale.
So you have a lot of different skills going on in this building. Is this what you're saying?
A lot, very, very wide range, because to solve waste, whether through recycling or reuse, there's a lot of different components that have to come together. We have to think about how do we collect it, sort it, process it? How do we build business models? How do we communicate it, get people exciting? So big marketing communication functions and all sorts of different skill sets. So it's quite a treasure trove of like brain elasticity, if you will.
How many staff in total?
Just under 500.
Wow. And your other offices, you've mentioned 20 countries. Do you have an office in every country that you're operating in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So we're in North America, Western Europe, UK, in Asia, in Thailand, Korea, Japan, and then Australia and New Zealand.
Very good. Well, that sets the background for us. That's the tone. Should we talk a bit about TerraCycle, which you founded in 2002? Because as you alluded to, it's an intriguing company. Essentially, you recycle stuff that other people can't or don't want to. And I wonder which it is.
These are very connected, right? Now, the biggest misconception in recycling, if we take a step back, right, is what makes something truly recyclable? And this is really misunderstood. When you ask an average person, they'll tend to say, the reason an aluminum can is recyclable just about anywhere is that it's possible to. And the reason a toothbrush is not recycled anywhere is because it's not yet possible to. And if you take that simple statement and make it a more sophisticated version of the same point, it would be, we need to invent the solution to recycle X, and then we need to make sure there's infrastructure and end markets and these sort of things. The reality, though, is unlike healthcare, for example, where people expect to be served if the cures exist, in recycling, it's all a free market, meaning there is no law forcing any garbage company to recycle anything it collects. It doesn't mean the system is broken. It just means that it's an open, free market system. And so really what gets recycled, why that aluminum can is special, is because it's profitable to recycle. And why 95% of objects are deemed not recyclable is not because they can't be. It just costs more to collect and process than the results are worth. So the problem with a toothbrush, just like a cigarette butt or a dirty diaper, or you pick the waste stream, is it simply costs more to collect it and process it than the results are worth.
Funnily enough, the last podcast I did, the toothbrush came up as an example, bizarrely. And I mean, the reason it's difficult to recycle is because there's 4 different types of plastic that are all molded together. There's metal in there as well. So it's just harder, isn't it? Essentially, whereas a can is a mono material.
Yes. So that's a great example, right? That hardness that you described doesn't mean it's not doable. It just means hardness is equal to money, right? There's more cost that you have to, add into the system. And in many cases, the cost, forget collecting the waste stream, just to process it is more than the value of the outputs. And so the virtue for doing that is not an economic virtue, but an environmental one.
Yes. I mean, you work, as we pointed out in the introduction, with materials such as cigarette butts, dirty nappies, chewing gum, crisp packets, pet food bags, toothbrushes, toothpaste tubes, and pretty much anything, it seems to me. How does it work for you then, Tom? If other people can't make money from recycling, how do you make money from recycling?
Yeah, absolutely. So our trick is not that we have necessarily figured out how to take a plastic toothbrush that has very little value in it and make that somehow, the value of gold or something like that. We certainly have figured out how do we collect and process these waste streams. The trick is, how do we get someone to pay for it, right? So if you're going to recycle a toothbrush, there's a bill at the end of the day. Just like if you're going to recycle a bicycle helmet or a plastic glove or a cigarette butt, someone has to pay the bill. And what TerraCycle's figured out is, how do we find stakeholders that disproportionately care about certain waste streams? So we're talking toothbrush. They're the manufacturers, like your Colgate or Procter & Gamble or Unilever might care and want to fund a recycling program, as they do. Perhaps retailers that are a bit more associated with oral care might want to do that, like pharmacies, and they have done that. There's pharmacies around the world where you can drop off and collect and recycle oral care waste through TerraCycle. But it could also be maybe organization types that are disproportionately indexed towards oral care, like a dentist or a school. And each waste stream in the world has this, right, built into it. If we take something completely different, perhaps the opposite of oral hygiene, let's call it cigarette butts, there, it could, of course, be the manufacturers, maybe retailers, but there, the big locations where there's a lot of smoking could be cruise ships and casinos. So they may want to fund that particular work. And this is what we peel back on each waste stream, is to figure out, because that's the real bottleneck. How do we find a funding source? And then once we've found the funding source, we can, for just about anything, set up the right way to collect it, to make it convenient and affordable, and then, of course, to recycle it into new things. Okay,
interesting. So therefore, since you brought cigarette butts up, I'm keen to talk about your process. And maybe let's take cigarette butts. How do you collect them in the first instance? And then what do you do with them? And who's paying you to do that?
Right. So these are connected in a way which is so interesting. So depending on who funds, we might set up different processes, right? So let me give me 2 different examples to compare and contrast for you. Let's say in one example, it could be the manufacturers who would fund. And then let's take another example. Let's say it's an airport who funds, just to compare and contrast, both with cigarette recycling. So an airport is going to be very specific, right? They are interested in cigarette butt recycling because they're typically, smokers who are going on a long flight. They're going to want to have their first and last cigarettes right at an airport, and it's sort of a more important moment than on average. So we would set up cigarette recycling at those appropriate smoking designated areas. And just imagine a bunch of sort of ashtrays, the airport services it, and then we pick up the bulk periodically. Now, if it was more a manufacturer, which is more thinking about how do cigarette butts litter, the entire country, then we do a multi-pronged approach. We think about how do we create collection from consumers, maybe do a mail-in program. Then we think about how do we do collection, say, at cities, because cigarette butts are the number one most littered waste stream. So then we work with cities to set up city-based infrastructure. Then we would think about where are cigarette butts more consumed than average, and those tend to be casinos, cruise ships, Navy vessels. That tends to be, those sort of places. And then we partner with them to set up big volume collection, and we keep doing this. And we go through all the different methods. Whether then we collect it from an airport or these other methods, it comes to our distribution centers where we take the waste. We first look at, did anyone put in something that wasn't a cigarette butt? And we have very low contamination rates, but it's still about 1%. So 1 in 100 items might not be the right thing. So we sort those out. And then from there, we recycle it. In case of cigarette butts, it would be we clean them, then we shred them. We separate the ash tobacco paper that gets composted, and the filter, which is made from a polymer called cellulose acetate, turns into new plastic products. And that would be how that particular example works.
Okay. All right. Let's take chewing gum. I don't want to go through everything that you do.
No, but pick a few.
A couple would be interesting, I think.
Yeah. I love it.
So chewing gum.
Chewing gum.
How does that process work?
So let's begin by the central issue is chewing gum costs more to collect and process, and the results are worse. So what's the funding source? The manufacturer always pops up. Like, that's easy. But you may have schools could be an interesting place because, kids stick them under the desk all the time. Or maybe cities, because every little black dot on the street is a littered piece of chewing gum. So you think about, again, stakeholders that have like a greater concern over chewing gum than something else, right? And in chewing gum, generally, that's an example which is done on the go. You're not really collecting from home. And so we would partner similarly with those areas where you have higher than average chewing gum rates. So it could be businesses, schools, and then maybe some street side bins that are deployed. And there, the process, once we've collected it and sorted it, chewing gum is really, a rubber type compound with food coloring and taste and sugar. When you chew it, that all gets digested. That's why at the end of chewing, it's sort of benign, if you will. You're just, sort of chewing a piece of rubber. And that, our team has figured out that we can integrate that into plastic products at about 40% use chewing gum, and then 60% other recycled material. So sometimes we are blending, right? We can't make a plastic that is 100% used chewing gum. It just wouldn't hold together. So that's an example where we'll mix it with other recycled materials to make a usable output. Okay.
And what happens to the material once you've recycled it, you've created something new? Because you do make your own products, don't you, from some of the materials you use?
In some cases, yes. We have sort of the line that we call TerraCycle made, where we are making finished products. But I would say if you zoom out, 99% of the waste we process into new raw materials that manufacturing companies buy from us. Could be like the automotive sector or the building sector that will buy the recycled plastic from us, or recycled metal or fibers, whatever comes out of our process, to make it into their parts. That's the vast majority of the volume. And then a few percentage points either we make into finished goods and then we sell directly. You can find those under TerraCycle made. Or sometimes our partners ask us to make things for them. And that could be big deployments, like with Colgate, they've asked us to make dozens of playgrounds from used toothbrushes and toothpaste tubes. It could be small deployments, like a pet food company just asked for 500,000 Frisbees made from used pet food bags. Or what we like the most is when they integrate it right back into their supply chain. Like with Pilot pens, we make the world's first pen from used pens. That's in Japan. Or with ASICS shoes, their first shoe made from used shoes. That's our favorite, when the company asks us to collect the waste and then we are able to get it right back into the same thing it began as.
On your website, I was intrigued by a zero waste box. For people who might not know, what is a zero waste box? How does that work?
Absolutely. So as we talked about, it all has to do with money flow. And what we've talked about in examples earlier is where the stakeholder is not the consumer funding for it, but a business, maybe the manufacturer, retailer. And then as individuals, we interact with these programs by dropping them off in the program for free. And we don't have any cost in the to participate. Again, this is all funded by these corporate stakeholders. But we found that we can only convince so many companies in any country at any given point in time to fund programs. Right? We don't have a free program for everything in every country. And so what we said is, look, let's make sure that we have these services available, even if we haven't found sponsors to pay for them. And then we make those available for purchase. And that's what the zero waste box model is. There are pouches, like little bags. There is then small small, medium, large sort of corrugated boxes, all the way to pallet and full truckload. Like you can get sort of any size of that waste stream you want. And the cost of these is the cost of getting the collection device to you, you filling it up, us picking it up, and then recycling everything that's inside.
And who's buying these boxes, Tom? These are for households, for offices, for hospitals?
All of the above, right? Household. We have a popular box, which is the zero waste birthday box, so it's for all the wrapping paper and all the stuff that gifts come in, or toy boxes seem to be very popular with households when their kids are getting older and they're aging out of toys, or, things like used clothing, all the way to coffee capsules. That would be for individuals. But then businesses are all the way to, what one would expect, like an office recycling its pens, or a media, like a recording studio recycling its old cassette tapes and DVDs. But it can also get to pretty sophisticated business examples. We do a lot of laboratory waste. So think old centrifuge tubes and pipette tips and pipette tip boxes, or PPE, all the way to really weird, sophisticated things like syringe filtration devices or IV bags. And you go on, everything becomes waste, right? So we try to always come up with solutions for what are, the waste streams that are out there that we're experiencing today.
And are there things that you definitely can't recycle?
There are maybe 3 things that would make it very difficult. I don't want to go to the word impossible, but what are the preventions, that could occur? The most obvious is legal, right? There are really good. We're not, we're very pro-regulation as an organization. And there are regulations that will say certain waste streams must be incinerated, and there is no legal option to have them recycled. For example, in hospitals, any waste that's touched, sort of bodily fluids, that must go to red bag incineration. Even if we could clean it and recycle it, it wouldn't be allowed. So there are going to be legal preventions. That seems like, in that example, like a really good one. The areas where, let's say the law is catching up to reality, is where, they might seem odd. So, for example, we do cannabis package recycling. And depending in the US, for example, there's different laws state by state. So you could have a state where it's legal. But if that waste is transported through a state where it's illegal, that becomes very difficult to move it to a place to process. So those are more weird, rules where the regulation has to catch up. So regulatory could be one. Another could be, it's just incredibly expensive and no one's willing to pay for it, right? So that becomes the more common, where we can't establish the money flow. That tends to be in waste streams that are big, bulky, and people don't have an emotional connection to. So this is the weird thing about garbage. Not all garbage is created equal. We get very upset about coffee capsules, because we probably see them every time we have a cup of coffee. We get very upset about cigarette butts because they're littered everywhere. But relative to how much volume or weight those make up in a dumpster, isn't it crazy that we don't get upset that when we renovate our room and throw out all the drywall and all the building material that, make up huge amount of dumpsters, we don't really seem to be that upset about it. So there needs to be the money flow is solved when people care. And so the type of issue could be, it's a waste stream that is generally expensive and people don't care. That could be the other sort of key barrier. What it tends not to get to is, can it actually be broken apart and made into new things? It's very rare that it ever pops up. Sandpaper would be an example where it's very difficult, because sandpaper is an abrasive. And when you try to rip it apart, it will destroy the equipment that is trying to rip it apart, because that's its job, right? To sort of take things, but this is so rare. I would say, for all intents and purposes, as long as funding can be achieved, anything can get recycled.
What's interesting is that you've gone beyond waste now. Your offshoot, Loop, which you launched, 7 years ago, actively tries to avoid creating rubbish. Back in 2019, you talked about how you wanted to bring back the Milkman. What's the thinking behind that? Essentially, customers can return their packaging of their products, so shampoo bottles or whatever, through you. You've described Loop as being a platform steward. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we thought a lot, this was maybe now close to 10 years ago, about is recycling and making from recycled content the right answer? And we say this as a recycling company, mind you. And we said, it's great, but it's a Band-Aid solution, because it's not solving waste at the root cause. It's just perhaps a really good way to manage waste. Certainly better than landfilling or incinerating it. And so we thought a lot about how do we go further? And where we landed is to learn from the days before garbage was invented. And garbage in this modern form is only invented in the 1950s, where we moved to complex materials, making our goods. Our clothing went from natural fibers to synthetic fibers. The chair we're sitting on went from wood to whatever plastic we're sitting on, today as we're having this discussion. And then we compounded that by fierce a popularity of consumerism. We buy today 10 times more stuff than 75 years ago. And that is fueled by this idea of a throwaway lifestyle, right? Of disposability. And we said that is the root cause, this idea of single use or disposable. We need to go back to the way the world was, where we darned our socks, cobbled our shoes, milk to motor oil came from, the Milkman or equivalents. And so that's why we made a major investment into loop and reuse and what we thought we could bring to the table. We don't want to be a retailer or a manufacturer. So we are a platform on which any manufacturer can enable a reusable version of their product. So this could be like, Haagen-Dazs ice cream to Tide laundry detergent, lots of things in between, mostly consumer goods to begin with. And then retailers can sell these to their consumers. And we become, if you will, the waste management function of reuse. So the way it works today, it's quite scaled and popular in France.
Big in Carrefour, right?
Yeah, Carrefour, Monoprix, Système U, a lot of these different French retailers. You can walk in, you'll see over 400 products, all packaged in fully reusable packaging, all different, so it could be a bottle of Scotch whiskey, could be, shampoo, orange juice, you name it, chickpeas. You just pay a deposit on any package you access, unique to that package. And then when you're done, dirty, no sorting, just throw them back in one of our bins at any store that's participating in the system. And then we are that waste management function as TerraCycle Loop. We give you back your deposits. We take the packaging, we sort it down to a product level. It gets cleaned, and then it goes back to the manufacturer who refills it and right back sold to someone else. And what's really fun here is while it's being reused, there is no waste being generated. And if it inevitably, or when really it inevitably breaks, and it can't be reused again, one of the design rules is it must be recycled back into itself.
Very good. And how many times on average, I suppose it depends on the product, but how many uses do you expect to get on average?
So we set the minimum threshold, and this is a policy that was aligned with a group of NGOs and other stakeholders. Like we really thought carefully, the minimum number of cycles is 10. Below that, the item does not get approved. So we have laboratories that test for durability and breakability and all the stresses on consumption, distribution, but also cleaning. Cleaning adds a lot of stress. You think like chemistry, temperature, both with water and with air. It has to do a minimum of 10, but many are designed, we think that they'll last 20, 30, 40 uses easily.
I hope you're enjoying the episode. We have some significant news for Material Matters. I'm delighted to say that we have a new home for our London Fair. We're heading east and we'll be collaborating with Media 10 as part of Shoreditch Design Week from the 15th to the 17th of September. The fair will be set across 2 floors of unlocked Shoreditch, a striking multi-storey former industrial building located on Curtain Road. However, while our home might have changed, the ethos of the fair remains the same. It will be full of manufacturers, organisations, makers and designers who place the importance of material intelligence at the heart of what they do. So, if you're interested in taking part, do get in touch at hello@materialmatters.design. That's hello@materialmatters.design. And before that, remember that Material Matters Copenhagen takes place from the 10th to the 12th of June. We're back at Ukraine House, Gamel Dock, with an array of brilliant exhibitors, including AHEC Europe, which will be presenting a very special exhibition. If you're planning on visiting 3 days of design, do make sure you stop by. You won't regret it, I promise. So initially, it started out as a kind of e-commerce site, and now it's in stores, primarily in France, in Carrefour. Was that a pilot phase for it to discover whether consumers were interested, or were you always going to go into physical shops?
Well, we always want to go into physical shops. And in fact, while we are celebrating success in France, we also did do pilots in Canada, US, UK, Japan, and we weren't able to get those to scale. So it was a really sort of interesting moment for us. But when basically the way this all came up is we first came up with the idea. Then we went to retailers and said, do you want to sell this? And they said, well, before we start putting it into our stores, we need to prove that our Carrefour or our Walmart or our Tesco consumer cares about it. And so our solution to that was to set up an online platform in the retailer's look and feel. So we did this with Tesco in the UK, Walmart in the US, so on and so forth. And we proved that citizens love this, and they loved it equally everywhere in the world. They bought it, they returned. That gave those retailers enough momentum to then physically launch it in store, which is what all those retailers did. From there, where the real fork in the road came is that we pushed every retailer to scale out of these like small pilots, think 5 stores, 10 stores, to like real meaningful scale. And we only got scale to occur in France. And it's not because the results were different.
Why is that, Tom?
In France, there's regulations that are both mandating reuse and subsidizing it. So there's the regulatory framework with the right carrots and sticks enabled, to get this to happen. And that doesn't exist anywhere else. And what we heard from the corporate actors was, even though it works, the problem with reuse is that it is some extra work. We have to now, at least at minimum, have muscles that package that we are filling has already been out there in the universe, right? So we have to have some health and safety, oversight on that, which is extra. And it's not truly incremental. A good way to think about incrementality is a shampoo company wants to invent conditioner, or a toothpaste company wants to invent mouthwash, or fabric detergent wants to invent fabric softener. And then once you've invented conditioner, you want to invent the next thing. Treatment, I guess, is what comes after. Those are incremental. Those are what really grow the revenue of consumer product industries. If we just go and say, let's just make that toothpaste better or the laundry detergent better, that's not incremental. And that's what reuse is. It's elevating the environmental credential of the product, but it's not getting you to buy anymore. And that's why it is harder to implement in business, and why the regulatory landscape is really, really important.
So how do the French work it then? What are the French doing that, say, in the UK or the US, we're not doing?
The consumer is the same, mind you. Yeah. The British consumer loves it as much as the French. It worked really well. When we did trials with Tesco, it was phenomenal. The only difference is the regulatory landscape. So in France, there is a law called the EJEC law that by 2027, grocers of a certain scale, like in the UK, that would be your Sainsbury's, Tesco's, M&S's, and so on, must offer 10% of their floor space to reusable packaging, which is a huge mandate, if you will. That's the stick. The carrot is that reuse projects, until they're mature and don't need subsidy, are subsidized aggressively, like up to 50, 70% subsidy. So that also really helps, and that's the carrot. Now, what's very exciting for the UK is Western Europe with EU regulation called PPWR, and the UK, even though it is not part of the EU anymore, is emulating a lot of these sort of regulatory indicators, is moving in the same direction as France. I can't share the retailer names, but we just signed an agreement with a bunch of major British retailers with a line of sight to think about how this could be implemented physically next year.
Interesting. If you don't devote whatever 10% of your floor space to reusable products in France, what do? They fine the companies? Is there somebody measuring the floor space of all these stores?
What's fascinating about your question is we actually call this law sort of a law with dentures, because the penalty mechanisms are not aggressive. Technically, to your question, there would be fines. But what we hear is that the government is not intending to heavily police, because they're hoping to see, that the voluntary adoption is moving forward well. But that goes to show you that you don't even have to have very aggressive regulation. Just the fact that regulation exists, even if it's not going to be policed aggressively, helps a movement like this really gain traction.
I mean, it relies on convenience, doesn't it? And making it as convenient for everybody as the system currently is.
That's the center trick that we realized, right? So when we first started Loop, we would go to companies and say, oh, you make your laundry detergent in a fabric bottle. How cool would it be in this great stainless steel version, like really elevating design. And that is really cool. And the virtues are there in reuse that you can do that, because the package isn't owned over one use. It's effectively shared many uses over many, many people. But it's very inconvenient for a manufacturer to scale a product like that. They have to do new filling technology and all this other, stuff. So what we shifted to was a hyper focus on convenience for the retailer, for the manufacturer, and for the consumer. And the punchline, sort of our mantra in Loop, is how do we make reuse feel like disposability? So a really easy example is today, when a manufacturer comes and joins us, we don't ask them to redesign packaging. We instead look at all the packages they have in their portfolio and figure out which ones are already conducive to reuse. And about 30% of what's on shelf can be cleaned and refilled with no worry. Like a heavy laundry detergent bottle in plastic, yeah, it can go through cleaning and refilling 10 times plus, not a problem. Anything in glass, more or less, can do that. Think a jar of pickles to your favorite jar, a bottle of wine. easily that bottle can be cleaned and refilled. And then the beauty is that you're not changing any of the back-end supply chain. It's all the same filling equipment, the same cartons it goes in, and except now it's all reusable.
So in other words, the likes of Häagen-Dazs aren't reinventing their packaging specifically for Loop nowadays.
So at the beginning they did, and it was exciting, but unscalable. So today, if we go to, let's say, an ice cream company, because you mentioned Häagen-Dazs, we would look to see, are there any package forms in their portfolio that are conducive to reuse? If they would have, let's say, a rigid plastic 1 pint, which some do, that could probably work. The rest probably not. Once Loop really becomes fully mature, right now we are well out of pilot in France. We're in about 500 stores, but full maturity is more like 5,000 or 10,000 stores. When we've hit that, I believe then the fancy packaging will have an opportunity to emerge. The big challenge that we realized in having custom development of packaging is manufacturers like Nestle are great at tiny quantities because they can make that in R&D settings, and mega quantities, but they don't really have a capability in between those two bookends.
That's interesting. So that mid-range they struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, basically, here's the feedback. They would say, hey, we can supply 5 stores, and then we can supply 5,000, and please don't call us between them.
Yeah, that's interesting. But you are working at scale in France.
Yes.
And does that mean, therefore, that you need to build loads of infrastructure? I mean, presumably you need cleaning facilities, collection depots, fleets of vans and lorries. I mean, what kind of level of investment are you looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, we've invested so far just around $50 million into the Loop platform, which for a company our size doing $100 million in revenue, that's a massive, massive investment. And basically the infrastructure starts by having collection bins at all the stores. So there's some form of way to return your bottles at every store. It might be different store by store. Then those have to be emptied and serviced and taken to a micro distribution center. We have about a dozen micro distribution centers across France where the packaging comes in, so it doesn't travel a long distance and gets sorted. Then from there, it goes to cleaning partners. And then from the cleaning partners, it goes out to the manufacturer again, who refills it.
So this work that you do felt absolutely on the zeitgeist for many, many years. How hard has it become in an America that's led by President Trump, who wants the oil industry to drill, baby, drill, has pushed back on the US's government banning plastic straws? I mean, are companies as receptive as they once were to what you're trying to achieve?
It's a mixed bag. So I'm very thankful that we're in 20 countries, and it's different in every country. I would say Europe, that's why Loop is thriving in Europe, but it's not thriving anywhere else, right? So something as innovative and ambitious as Loop, you need the right political support. And in Europe, that exists, and we're grateful for it. What I would say is you zoom over to North America, which is the epicenter of what you described. There's both headwind and tailwind. The headwind is in anything that's consumer facing, because many companies, don't have taken down their pressure on environmental reporting, like measuring carbon, for example. They feel less consumer-driven pressure because that's about the narrative, and less regulatory pressure. That's the deregulation and effectively terminating a lot of people who would police the regulation. So they don't have to worry. From a consumer side, we're seeing a lot of leaning back and less momentum on consumer-facing sustainability projects. With that said, the interesting component is we're seeing the opposite on B2B, on internal projects. And I think it's because the politics doesn't change people's foundational point of view. It's not like, someone who believed in climate change now doesn't because the politics have shifted. How they may invest in it, though, does, right? So, big headwind on B2C, but a lot of tailwind on B2B, where people are saying, look, we might not focus on the consumer right now, but we're going to make sure our factory, our operations are really moving in the right direction.
I've seen you talk about greenwashing quite often in the past, but I'm quite interested in green hushing. Is this something where companies are reticent to talk about their sustainable credentials on the basis that people might attack them for something they're doing that isn't sustainable? Is this something that you come across in your walk of life?
Yes, it's so interesting because you first had greenwashing, which is everyone accusing companies of like overstating green credentials. Then companies and that was maybe like the epicenter of green hushing for the reason you said. I think we've hit the apex like 3 years ago, like 3-4 years ago. Almost every company was so scared to do any environmental communication because they said, no matter what we do, we're going to be accused of greenwashing. So effectively, they went into not doing anything or not talking about it, which then got termed green hushing. What I would draw as a contrast, though, to where we are today is companies are still doing very little, but now they're not saying it's because they're worried about getting attacked. They're saying, well, we don't have any pressure to do it. They're saying, oh, maybe the American consumer doesn't care, or we don't have a regulatory pressure, to worry about. So the reason for doing less has shifted away from I'm scared about negative environment, a negative PR, if you will, to the pressure isn't there. Now, what I tell my team, because you can imagine when we do town halls at TerraCycle, people are anxious about, hey, what does this mean? And, I think we're in a temporary moment because the reason we care about the environment, those indicators, whether you look at any indicator on planetary health, is only getting worse tomorrow than today. So this sort of feels like, a drug addict that was in, rehab decided to, go party for a bit. But at some point, the rooster's going to roost,
Okay, that's an interesting analogy. You're a fan of big government, by the sound of it, and regulation. It's required.
Yes. I think like my favorite answer would be from a governmental point of view. I think that, all the things that create a vibrant, healthy middle class, so education, healthcare, it should be free and it should be the best because you want a vibrant middle class. And where I think government should be heavy there. And just really to make it free. And there shouldn't be student debt or medical debt. Like that stuff is insane to me. Then there should be regulations so we don't, we're not responsible for our externalities, altogether. That's the big issue in sustainability. The really egregious things that we can do that, that harm the commons should be regulated, that we can't do that. We shouldn't be able to, poison the planet for short-term profit, right? There should be these rules. Of the chess game. There's got to be some rules that I really believe is a strong use for regulations. And from there, let the free market determine the rest.
Can we talk about your background, Tom?
Yeah.
Because you were born in Hungary.
Yes.
You were left when you were 4 years old. Do you have memories of living there?
I do, but, more like smell and taste and sound, less so visual. The biggest thing I took away from Hungary, because it was still under the Iron Curtain at the time, was just this, idea of living in extreme frugality, everything we used for something else, that was a big thing that I left with.
I was going to say there must have been a culture of extreme reuse in communist Hungary.
Extreme. I mean, you take the lard off the frying pan, after you had whatever the bacon you made and put that into a tub, put that in the fridge, and that was, butter or lard or whatever. Like everything was like that. And it really shocked me when I landed in Canada many years, or maybe like 4 years later, I was 7 at the time, where like what you found in the garbage was nuts. In Hungary, we'd have to apply to get a TV. The government would have to like smile on you to be authorize the ownership of a television set. First TV my family ever owned, we found in the garbage in Toronto. You
were searching the garbage, or how does one stumble across a TV?
You're walking, and like we lived in an apartment building, and there's these dumpsters that are overflowing, and you see like 2-3 TVs on top of the dumpster. My dad and I were like, why don't we take one and see? We thought we'd probably just take it apart and pull out a speaker or something, and it turned out they plugged in and worked, and were in color, which was, quite something for us.
Both your parents were doctors, I think I'm
Yes.
right in saying, as are mine, interestingly.
Oh, interesting.
Was he a tinkerer? Did he enjoy getting his hands dirty with products and tearing things down and repairing?
Absolutely. That was like a fun thing we used to do, is go pick up stuff from the dumpster, stereos and things. We always like to do that and take them apart and build new radios, new speakers, whatever the parts could afford, But it was tremendous fun. I think that came from necessity in Eastern Europe, but it then became like a fun hobby when you're flooded with waste in North America.
And you grew up in Toronto.
That's right.
Were you interested in the natural world as a child?
Canada gave me, I would say, the biggest love of environment. That's one of the biggest things I took away from, my childhood in Canada, was just this extreme love of nature. We used to do canoe trips and, really explore, the great outdoors. And like Canada is mostly that, it's phenomenal from what you can explore and see. And for me, it's a love of entrepreneurship and environment that came together to sort of be the thesis, if you will, for TerraCycle.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. Because it took you 3 years to get to Toronto from leaving Hungary.
That's right.
You were traveling through Europe. What journey was that?
Yeah, we left Hungary in 86 when Chernobyl happened.
Right.
That just destabilized the border, and then we became political refugees. And that 3 years was basically trying to seek asylum, first in Germany, then in Holland, then in Belgium, and then finally got permanent asylum in Canada. But it was a lot of time spent in consulate immigration lines, like professionally waiting and filling out paperwork, then hanging tight,
And while this was going, where were you living in these various places?
My parents got really good at making friends, these wonderful people let us in. In Holland, a professor who my parents met at a train station let us in, and we lived with him for 6 months. And it was this sort of thing for 3 years, which in retrospect, I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. I didn't make a big deal out of it at the time. I just thought, like, that's how it goes, right? But it really showed that, you can live these adventures,
Do you remember much of that period? You would have been, what, 6, 7?
I mean, I was between the age of 4 and 7. So I'd remember, I do, but vague little glimpses. And I think it was more the mentality that has stuck with me, less so like big concrete memories.
You were always entrepreneurial, though. You were designing websites for clients as a child. Your bedroom was full of screens.
That's right. I had my first company at 14. I mean, I had a half, part-time employee, which was pretty fun at that age.
You had a part-time employee at the age of 14?
Yep. And made low 5-figure revenue. I mean, so, I figured, that was exciting. And this was just when the internet was beginning. So a kid could make websites and stuff for major companies. There was this one moment in time where that could occur because the web was just beginning. So you could code a website on simple text and make it in Photoshop and be good to go. And at a competitive level, mind you. It was a fun experience, and it taught me a lot about business and just gave me a lifelong passion for entrepreneurship.
And where do you think this entrepreneurial drive, where does it come from? I mean, is it to do with your immigrant background, do you think?
I think so. I give a lot of credit to it. To me, entrepreneurship is the greatest ability to create change. And I think if it's mission driven or purpose driven or social entrepreneurship, any of these sort of metaphors you want to put onto it, then you also feel great in the process. And that's what I love about it. It affords me the biggest paintbrush to affect the world, more than any other tool I could possibly think of.
Mm. And this notion of it needing to be purpose driven, that was always there from a young age?
No, to be fair, no. Right? When I first started my company at 14, it was not purpose driven. I thought entrepreneurship was my ticket to fame and fortune, pretty egocentric points of view. But the idea of integrating purpose really came in college. I think we're all a bit more utopian then, and thinking about, I was thinking a lot about, why do people have a career doing whatever to make a lot of money and then spend their retirement years giving it away? I mean, and being a philanthropist. Why not do both at the very same time? And that's where my brain started thinking, in first year of university, was how do we intersect this idea of purpose and profit? And, at the beginning, we would call it eco-capitalism. Today, you could call it social entrepreneurship, or, there's lots of monikers that sort of say the same thing. But I think it is more challenging. Let's be clear. It's not as easy as just making money, but it brings so much fulfillment. And it also has some interesting superpowers. It opens doors, to leaders better than ever before. We get to really have access to, to folks in companies that otherwise would be very difficult to have access to because of purpose.
What were you like at school?
I enjoyed school thoroughly. But the part I enjoyed about it the most was the outside classroom stuff, the sports teams, the clubs. I even made my own clubs, when we had to do in our high school, like mandatory community service. And, that would mean you go volunteer at a hospital or a library or something, So for me, I said, well, why don't we just start an after school rocketry club for kids?
Rocketry?
Yeah, like model rocketry. We would make
cool.
These rockets that would go maybe 400, 500 meters up in the sky, with real gunpowder and all that. It was fun.
Yeah. But you enjoyed school. You were academic.
Loved it. I didn't leave school because I didn't like school. I left because I started TerraCycle in my first year. And by second year, it was difficult to do both. So I had to make a choice.
Let's talk about Princeton, because you did drop out after a little over a year when you had the original idea for TerraCycle. There was a moment in an economics class which seems to have been pivotal to your thinking.
Yes. So just to paint the picture here, right? I had just gotten to Princeton. I had ended up winding down the company I was working on in Toronto because it'd be hard to transfer that over to New Jersey. And so I was looking for this idea of purposeful entrepreneurship sort of came through. And the idea of purposeful entrepreneurship actually began, the first seed was planted. I was taking an intro to economics class, and the professor's first question in this class was, what's the purpose of business? And the answer she was looking for was really uninspired. She said, the purpose of business is to maximize profit to shareholders. which is basically make money for the owners. And I was like, I get it. Like I do. I understand why profit's important, and without profit, you're bankrupt. So it makes sense. But business affects so many stakeholders, employees, customers, vendors, all these different stakeholders. And the only stakeholder we care about is profit to shareholders. And so, for me, I started thinking about profit as maybe not the reason of business, but is the key indicator of health, right? So if a business is profitable, it's like being very healthy. You're going to live a long life, grow and flourish. And if the opposite is true, well, the opposite will happen. You'll go bankrupt. But maybe it's not the purpose. The purpose is perhaps, how does it make the world different? Ideally for the better, and that sort of teed up this idea of looking for purposeful business. And then in the same class, ironically, we were drawing supply and demand curves ad nauseum. And that's what you do in econ class. And then you learn that if you have more supply, the price goes down. You have more demand, the price goes up, these sort of tensions. And I started thinking about, well, wait a minute, garbage, where would it intersect in the supply and demand curve? And it turns out no economics textbook explores this concept. You have phenomenal supply, but you also have negative demand. And once that anomaly sort of came through, it started a lifelong fascination with garbage, because it's filled with these crazy anomalies, that just don't exist anywhere else.
What did your parents make of you dropping out of university, Tom?
Well, you said your parents were both physicians too, right? Mm. So you can empathize with this. I didn't tell them actually for the first half year. My dad called me and asked why the tuition checks stopped, the tuition bills stopped coming. And then I explained, that I'm doing this full time. And it was one of those moments where, I guess I was needed to rebel a little bit, but they knew it was my decision, so they supported. And the other sort of nice thing, to be fair to this question, it wasn't a very dramatic dropping out, because Princeton doesn't let you drop out. You just take indefinite sabbatical.
Yes, you're still there technically.
I mean, yes, I could just go back tomorrow, which is nice because many universities limit to you have to come back within 2 years, or then you have to reapply. And so I do give a lot of credit to Princeton that it made dropping out easy.
So you co-found TerraCycle with John Bayer.
That's right.
But the idea wasn't waste originally. The idea was manufacturing vermicompost, or as the company used to describe it, worm poop. Where did that come from? Well,
so now go back to this sort of Princeton moment, purposeful business, garbage being the fascination. I started really academically thinking about waste. And then that first year, spring break, we went up to visit my friends who had gone to school in Montreal. And they were growing, pot plants effectively in their basement. This was way before everything became legalized, right? So it was a little bit more, covert ops, let's say. And they couldn't make the plants work well. One day, they just started taking organic waste, feeding it to worms, taking the resulting worm poop, feeding it to the plants, and then the plants did incredibly well. And for me, this was sort of an inspiring moment. It really catalyzed a real example that we could do in garbage, where what got me excited is it's garbage. You get paid for the input. So we figured, hey, wait a minute, if we make a product out of garbage, all our inputs will have negative cost. Then we convert it, then we can make a product. And it turns out worm poop is a great fertilizer. And that's how TerraCycle began. The logo I actually drew as a worm. And Terra, Earth, Cycle, that was the beginning. And we were a worm poop company.
Yeah. So you took waste from Princeton University's cafes and
that's right,
and fed it to red worms, basically.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Just on campus, we got a little spot given to us, and we were, having worms digest all of the leftovers.
And you sold the compost in recycled drink bottles. I mean, was that about money as an idea of packaging, or how did you come up with that idea?
Well, not even recycled, reused, right? So we couldn't afford packaging. No one would invest in this idea. And so we decided one day to just raid everyone's recycling bins in town, because we figured out people are throwing out packaging. Why don't we just take this used packaging, put our worm poop into it, and sell it? And that's what we did. We started getting old used Coke and Pepsi bottles, cleaning them out, filling them up with the worm poop. And that became our first product. And it sort of had a nice breakthrough to it, because it became the world's first product that is made and packaged out of garbage.
And you hit upon a novel way of sourcing the bottles. You created bottle brigades. What are bottle brigades, Tom?
Well, so it was actually not easy to get used soda bottles, because you can't really go through people's garbage. That's frowned upon, let's say. And if we would go to a recycling center, the problem is the bottles were all crushed with trucks. So they weren't, their shape wouldn't hold up anymore. So we needed to get uncrushed used soda bottles. And so we decided to go to schools and convince schools to collect those for us. We coined that the Bottle Brigade. And we would pay each school 2 cents per bottle that they got for us. And this created a source of like absolutely wonderful bottles that we could clean, fill up with our worm poop, and then sell.
Very good. I mean, it's really interesting because the business is going well. Your first clients are Home Depot, Walmart, Canada in 2004. I think Target followed soon afterwards. But then the company changed. You stopped making fertilizer and started recycling waste instead in around 2007. Why did you decide to do that? Why change the company?
It's a great question. We were at this time, like 5 years in, we're doing about 5 million in revenue. So fine, size worm poop business. In fact, where I'm sitting here in Trenton used to be all worm poop bottling and brewing and, those sort of things. And I remember asking myself, like 5 years into the business, was the goal to start a fertilizer company? And the answer was never that. The answer was always, how do we solve for the idea of waste? That was like the big, hairy idea. And we realized a challenge, which is that if you're making a consumer product, as a consumer product company, the output, the product is the business hero. And you're going to then want to make the very, very best product. And we found ourselves doing that. That meant we were taking certain organic waste to feed the worms, but not other organic waste. We were taking uncrushed soda bottles, but we wouldn't take crushed soda bottles. So we were taking the best of the garbage, still technically garbage, but we would never touch, the real gross stuff like cigarette butts or dirty diapers or chewing gum or you name it. And we realized this was a foundational flaw. So it took about a year. It was a very difficult process, a complete metamorphosis, if you will, to shift the business hero from the output, the product, to the input, the garbage. Now, we would still collect and do something with waste, but we shifted the focus to how do we solve X waste stream instead of how do we make a bird feeder or a fertilizer and what waste can we make it from? It was like a foundational shift. And it was a challenging pivot, but it's what turned the company into what it is today.
Yeah. But presumably you had staff there who were wanting to make fertilizer or whose skills were in making fertilizer who then had to leave. How did that transition work? What were the most difficult elements of it?
The HR side was massive. I mean, we lost half the team, either voluntarily or, it just wasn't a fit anymore. The skills they had for worm poop weren't the skills we needed for recycling. So I'd say half the team changed. I almost got fired in the process. My board, there were certain stakeholders in the board that said we invested, rightly so, mind you, in a worm poop company and wanted that vision to be the focus. So that's why I really call it like a metamorphosis. Like we went in a caterpillar, we went into this sort of cocoon, foundationally changed and came out a butterfly. But it was a very difficult process. The one silver lining was that the transition you wouldn't have ever noticed in our revenue. It just kept going up. But what made it up foundationally shifted from selling fertilizer to selling effectively recycling services.
How did you manage to do that in that case?
So what we looked at was we took this sort of academic step back, right? We said, look, if we want to solve for waste, we really need to take this big academic journey on, and this is what, during this time, we're still just making worm poop, on what is waste, why does it exist, what drives recyclability. And as we started thinking about recyclability, we realized that it's not about whether something can or cannot be recycled, because we had sort of figured out, hey, you can turn anything into anything. It's the economics, what we were talking about earlier in our discussion. And once we realized that, we said, well, okay, let's find out if there's people who are willing to pay the economics. So we went to sort of like-minded consumer product companies, friends of ours, if you will, in the space, Cliff Bar, which is like a, eco, hiking bar company, or Stonyfield Yogurt, which makes organic yogurt, or Honest Tea, which is again, organic, all these like sort of eco consumer product companies. And we said, hey, energy bar company, Cliff Bar, if we could figure out a way to collect and recycle your Cliff Bar wrappers, would that be interesting to you? Would you fund it? Or Honest Tea, would you fund juice pouch recycling? Stonyfield, would you fund yogurt cup recycling? And unanimously, they all said yes. So we used that Bottle Brigade base, the way we collected the soda bottles, and we just expanded that to also collect juice pouches, energy bars, yogurt cups. And then, because we already had a good scale on how do we turn those into goods, we turned them into goods. At the time, we would still sell those finished goods at retail, but that's what began the transition. And what we then realized was that we, as a company, can only make so many goods ourselves and make sure they get sold and find markets. So it's much easier to shift to making raw materials and let manufacturers then take those raw materials and make whatever goods they're good at selling and marketing and dealing with.
And when you're doing something like that, or say when you launch Loop with huge investment, how does that affect you personally? Do you have sleepless nights? Do you find these things very difficult? I mean, does it get you up in the morning? How does it affect you on a personal level?
Yeah, I'm smiling as I answer that because yes, although the stress is high, like when we both moments, transitioning from worm poop to recycling or launching Loop and doing the big push on reuse, suddenly you're working from 5 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. There's a lot of extra workload, but it's also phenomenally exciting because it's sort of like going through that startup moment again where you're reinventing the company, but you're doing it with a lot of resource, right? Like you're not doing it just, on your dorm room floor like a startup. You already have a system, at place. So you can do it with a proverbially bigger paintbrush. And so that to me is really energizing. And that energy is critical because the workload is fierce. And it's not just a lot of just hours of work. You have then to deal with the HR side or deal with, different the business challenges that come, all these other sort of bits and pieces that come out as a result.
Do you enjoy that side of it, I wonder?
Yeah.
Because, you started obviously from college. You now have however many hundreds of people you have working for you. And there's a whole different set of pressures, I imagine.
Yeah, like I love that change component as an entrepreneur. Where I am not as good is just sort of the day-to-day, keeping things normal, right? Keeping things running. And that's why you have to have a great team who can do that. What I love is when we start feeling stable, I start feeling anxious and it's like, okay, what do we do next? How do we push the envelope again? How do we disrupt ourselves? How do we, rethink and re-challenge everything that we took for granted?
That's interesting you say that because we are coming to the end of our time, Tom. Unfortunately, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
This is really fun.
Thank you. But before we go, what can we expect from TerraCycle and Loop in the future? What are your plans?
So right now we have this cornerstone in France for Loop. And the focus is to continue to grow France, which is going quite well, but then launch in the UK and launch in more markets in Western Europe where this regulatory framework seems to be present, and then hope it emerges elsewhere. We're really hoping for the state of California to have some exciting regulations come out of and other areas. That's for reuse. And as that gets established, the next phase is going beyond consumer packaged goods like your bottle of ketchup or your bottle of shampoo to see how far can reuse support consumption. Can we go into textiles? Can we go into electronics? Like how far can it push? It can't be for everything, but how far can it go? That's what we're really going to experiment with on reuse. On the recycling side, where TerraCycle's live in 20 countries, we hope to open more markets. We're doing a lot of acquisitions. We've bought 3 companies. We have appetite to do more, bringing on really exciting new capabilities into what we can do, especially around industrial waste, because that's where there's a lot of really weird, complex things that you would just never thought existed in the normal sort of day-to-day world.
Very good, Tom. Well, we look forward to the next however many years disrupting yourself, which is kind of a fascinating way of approaching business. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to the next time our paths will cross.
To find out more about Tom and TerraCycle, go to TerraCycle.com. You can also go to our website to hear other podcasts that I've done, to sign up to our newsletter, and to find out all about the various events we'll be running in 2026, including Material Matters Copenhagen. One more thing, it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. For as little as £3.50 a month, you can receive invites to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.